What if I told you the freedom that you've been chasing on the road could be your biggest mental health challenge? The van life that you've been planning or are living could spark or trigger anxiety that you never saw coming. Here's what most of us don't talk about. The transition to the nomadic lifestyle doesn't just test your mechanical abilities or your budget. It fundamentally rewrites your relationship with solitude, your partner, and yourself. Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Linnea Axman. She is a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, and she's going to shatter some of the myths that we've been told about the nomadic lifestyle. She's going to tell you why anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder not only show up in the traditional lifestyle, but also in the nomadic life as well. But more importantly, she's going to show you how to recognize the signs and symptoms so that you can transform your travel experience. Because here's the truth. Your mental health isn't separate from your adventure. It is your adventure. And when you get this right, every sunset becomes more vibrant, every challenge becomes more manageable, and every mile becomes more meaningful. I've time-stamped everything in the video, so skip to what you need most. But trust me, this conversation changes everything. All right, good day to all of my Paddy Wagon Traveler subscribers. I am so excited today to bring you an incredibly qualified psychiatric nurse practitioner. We're going to be talking about things today that are related to van life, RV life during Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. But these are really mental health strategies that go across for everybody. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Linnea Axman. Hello, Dr. Axman. It's great to have you on the channel.
Hi, Patrick. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Axman, I'm doing a series on my Paddy Wagon Travels channel in YouTube regarding mental health, really kind of gearing in and focused on van life and RV life, and some of the challenges and pitfalls with maintaining good mental health on the road. And so today, first of all, before we get into the topics of conversation, I'd love to know your background, and I know that you have a business, and I'd like to hear a little bit about your business as well.
Well, thank you very much. I'll give you a brief overview. So, like you said, my name is Linnea Axman. I am both a family and a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. I do have a business that focuses on mental health, although I do what some might understand as integrative health care, kind of combine primary care and mental health care. I was on active duty in the Navy for 25 years. And so, although I travel alone now that I have retired, I did a lot of traveling alone while on active duty, and some of the same mental health issues that people have with RV life and van life occur when we travel alone, regardless of the mode of travel.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that, and thank you for your service. It's wonderful to have you on Paddy Wagon Travels today. So, shall we get started, Linnea?
Please, let's do that.
Linnea, from a clinical perspective, what unique mental health challenges do you see specifically in people who have nomadic lifestyles? You know, people who live in a van or people who live in an RV, and how do these maybe differ from traditional housing situations?
Well, thank you for that question. And first, before I answer specifically the question about mental health issues for people living in vans or RVs, one of the things that I want to tell your viewers is that their lifestyle, they share the three common mental health disorders with the rest of the people that live in a home that's not on wheels, right? I want to be careful to say I understand RVs and vans are homes, but people who live in homes that aren't on wheels, the top three mental disorders in our country are anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder in that order. And interestingly enough, in my research for this talk, I found that people traveling share those same top 3 concerns. Now, there are, and I'm going to speak about them in a moment, some other concerns for those of you or those of us that travel. But I'd like to, with your permission, talk about just some of the signs and symptoms so that people can maybe address these things before they get on the road, or if they identify them while they're on the road, what they can do to be safe.
Absolutely, please. That would be great.
Okay. So for depression, some of the very common symptoms are sadness, loss of interest or pleasure in doing things, eating more or eating less, sleep problems, sleeping more or sleeping less, feeling very tired. And then some of those that are a little more difficult to pinpoint, a sense of not feeling good enough, difficulty concentrating. And the one that's most scary for all of us is if we start thinking about death and dying. So those are the symptoms of depression. And if those symptoms start to interfere with your daily life, please seek help from your primary care provider. The most common symptoms of anxiety are excessive worry, feeling very restless, again, feeling tired, again, difficulty concentrating, being very irritable and cranky. Again, sleep disturbances, and anxiety tends to have some physical symptoms as well. Sometimes a rapid heartbeat, some shortness of breath or dizziness, and maybe even some sweating that you just can't figure out where that came from. So again, if those symptoms stick around for a couple weeks and are really interfering with your life, whether you are in a home that's not on wheels or in a home that's on wheels, please do seek assistance for those symptoms. Now, some of the things that can occur while you're on the road that are different from people that are at home might be a sense or a feeling of guilt because you're in this beautiful environment and yet you may not feel happy for a variety of reasons. Maybe your RV or your van have been acting up, or you're not feeling well, or you're lonely, and you're in this beautiful place and people say to you, how can you feel bad or sad? You're in this beautiful place working or vacationing. So a sense of guilt is not uncommon. So that's one of the things that people have to deal with. And we're going to talk also today, with your permission, about loneliness and isolation. That is a very real thing for people traveling and when they're alone. So those are some extra things that people that are traveling either as families or by themselves can encounter.
These are such excellent things to talk about. You know, I translate this a little bit when I was on my travels to Arizona and I was on the road for 30 days. And, you know, I love to travel. I love the nomadic lifestyle. It's just inbred in me. I mean, truly, I am a restless soul. But I wasn't, it didn't, a loneliness didn't escape me. You know, it really didn't. And what I found was kind of a sense of sadness that I had disconnected from everybody. And, you know, normally when I travel with some very, very dear friends. And, you know, we all have this, you know, this travel caravan going on. But this last trip was by myself. And while it was incredible, you know, all the sights and the sounds, and especially the transition between the East and the West, you know, and seeing like the windmills and all the trains and the trains that were like 2 miles. Despite all that beauty, Linnea, I still had some sense of grief and sadness, and I felt guilty. Like, what's wrong with you, dude? I mean, you know, you're traveling the world right now, and you're looking at all these beautiful sights, but yet I was sad. And so that really resonates with me. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience. I'm sure your viewers will relate to that. There's one other thing I want to mention, and that is while people traveling, I'm just going to refer to your viewers as people traveling. Would that be okay?
Yes,
Living
absolutely.
a nomadic lifestyle. The one thing that they share in common is they minimize or delay addressing their physical and mental health needs. And that's been demonstrated in the research because you want to get on the road, right? You don't want to have a reason that you can't go. But I'm just going to ask your viewers to please not do that, because maybe they'll prevent a problem down the road if they can take care of their physical and mental health concerns prior to getting on the road.
Well, what about virtual and telehealth? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
can is that a viable option for, let's say, people who are really planning on getting on the road and really don't want to delay it? Can they go through virtual and telehealth if they need some, counseling or coaching?
Yes, absolutely. If you're getting ready to get on the road and you just can't take time to have that yearly exam, or you just feel like you need to talk to someone about your fears and anxieties, or you need health coaching. For example, if you don't mind, I'll share here very briefly some of the things that can really help those disorders we've talked about and prevent others would be talking to a nurse coach or a health coach about sleep hygiene. How do I, without taking medicine, prepare for bed? How do I eat healthy? What is an adequate amount of physical activity? Those are things that you yourself, I believe, could assist someone with. And yes, there are wonderful psychotherapy services through telehealth. You can even do a primary care visit through telehealth if you don't want to go in and have your physical exam. So for those of you that have time to prepare before getting on the road, if you're between the ages of 19 and 21, you need a full physical exam every 2 to 3 years. If you're between the ages of 22 and 64, every 1 to 3 years, depending on if you have any chronic conditions. And if you're over 65, like me, regardless, you should have an annual physical exam. And also, plan for your medication, supplements, and over-the-counter meds. Please carry an adequate supply of them. And if for some reason you weren't able to get that prescription refilled, make sure you take your bottles with a current prescription along with you. If you have severe allergies, wear a medical alert bracelet, or serious diagnoses, diabetes that requires insulin or special medication. And always, 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 even if you're just going on a day hike, carry some form of identification.
These are excellent suggestions. A lot of my viewers, but a lot of the people that are in the nomadic community, are very health conscious and really do want to have a really positive outlook on their health because they're living life, dude. I mean, they're living life out there, and so, but I think preparing for the road is a huge issue. And I think a lot of people who watch the channel often say, how do I prepare to get on the road? This is a huge life transition for people. They've gone through this whole notion of, in our younger audience as well as our older audience, the nomadic lifestyle is no longer reserved for retired people. I mean, we have a lot of digital nomads that watch the channel and folks that are working from the road. And so preparing to get on the road is a big life decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the strategies you employed just recently or you shared just a moment ago really helps to say, hey, if you're going to get on the road, let's get prepared for it, and that's great advice. But I'm curious about this life transition. What does the research say about how people mentally prepare for this type of transition to go, live life on the road as a nomad?
Right. So living life alone on the road as a nomad. So let's talk about the individual that is truly alone. They're not with their spouse or family, because each spousal unit and then family unit have their own set of circumstances. But when you're traveling alone, as you've alluded to, you can have certain experiences, and the change from living in a fixed building to being on the road by yourself can bring with it fear and anxiety. You know, people always ask me for a good definition of anxiety. And like much of mental health, depending on who you talk to, you might get a little bit different definition. But here's what I tell my clients. Fear is this sense of dread about something that is concrete. For example, this is my example. I have never gone skydiving before. I fear what that process might be like. And that makes sense because it's new to me. Anxiety often is related to something that's happened to us in our past that sits in our brain, but we don't remember it, right? Memories of experiences, unpleasant experiences, aren't saved in the same way as normal memories. So we still have the emotion, but we can't remember what it's tied to. So we may experience the same feeling, and we might even describe it as fear, but we can't identify what we are afraid of. So the other way to look at anxiety is fear of the future, regardless of what that future holds. Fear is much more easily defined. Anxiety tends to be a little more fluffy and ubiquitous. Anxiety and fear actually keep us safe, right? So when we're fearful or anxious, we become on high alert. And in my example of jumping out of an airplane, I'm going to be really listening to that instructor, right? So I don't kill myself when I forget to open my parachute, right? But at some point, that fear turns into such high level that I can't concentrate. So the reason I'm giving you these examples is if you are full of fear, or if you feel, and I'm going to use people's common language, anxious, when it gets to the point where you can't concentrate, it's difficult to drive your vehicle. You don't feel safe driving your vehicle. You might get those feelings of your heart racing. And you can't really tell anybody why you feel that way. Then it's time to maybe talk to somebody. The transition of living in a fixed home to being on the road can be anxiety provoking because it's fear of the future, of the unknown. But it also can be related to things that we don't even remember. So sometimes when it interferes with our ability to function, we need to talk to somebody.
I love that advice. I really do.
Good.
You know, it takes me back to when I first got on the road back in 2016. I put up my video, and I'm talking to the camera in this empty house. And I literally knew that when I closed that garage door, my whole life was going to change and I was going to be a full-time nomad. And the anxiety that I experienced, Linnea, was so crazy. And I remember that when I got into the RV and I started to drive away, I was literally shaking.
Mhm.
I mean, I was literally shaking, and I video recorded the whole thing. So I had that as a momentum, you know, to when I
Oh,
got on the
boy.
road. So, but this is really timely information.
Well, and you speak to something that's really important. You recognize it, maybe sharing it with others, but also preparing for the road. And if you don't mind, I know one of your questions was about the difference between solitude and solitude, isolation, and loneliness, because we can be alone but not lonely, right?
Right.
Right. So I think if it's okay with you, this might be a good segue for that
Sure.
conversation.
Absolutely.
The only time that being alone becomes concerning to your physical or mental health is when you are chronically alone and you experience it as unhealthy. What I tell people often is, and I don't know if your viewers have time for this, but if they can get comfortable with being with themselves first, so that once they're on the road, it's like you said, you were talking to yourself, right? Talking to the radio, being comfortable with Linnea, being comfortable with Patrick first before getting on the road. Now, if you can't, if you don't have time, maybe being on the road is time to get comfortable with yourself. And people are like, well, why can chronic isolation that makes you feel bad or it feels wrong? Who cares? What does that really do? Well, it has been linked to things like high blood pressure, heart problems. We talked about depression and anxiety, and even dementia. It's not the being alone. It's what your brain does with being alone. So if you can get comfortable with you before or during your trip, then you're really going to help your mental and physical health. There are some warning signs I'd like to share with your viewers.
Sure.
That show that maybe being alone is not good for you. And and that would be like increased alcohol use, poor sleep, or not taking care of your personal hygiene. And I recognize when I go camping, my personal hygiene is different than when I'm not camping, okay? But I'm talking about what your viewer's norm is. And then just a feeling of lack of motivation and a feeling of just worthlessness. Those are all cues to you that you need to engage in some healthier behaviors. And I have a list of those, unless you have any additional questions for me.
No, I think these are very timely. You know, it's funny. I've recently watched a video, and the name of the channel is Linnea and Akia. And Linnea is a lovely young lady who has purchased property, and she's living van life. And she addressed the issues of loneliness. And she said, you know, in her narrative, she said, you know, a lot of people question whether I like to be alone. And she said, the reality of it is, and this speaks really to your point, she says, I'm happy with my own company. When I feel as though the loneliness is creeping in, then I know I need to engage in contact with my family or with friends and whatnot. But she really did address that issue of loneliness and being happy with her own, spending time with herself. And it's such a great channel to watch, but it really speaks to what you just said.
Well, I appreciate that, and that'll probably be a great resource for your viewers. But just for your viewers' information, I live in very rural northern Arizona on a 2-acre piece of property, and I can see my neighbors' homes, but I may not see a neighbor for week or weeks at a time. And so living here, I've really had to get comfortable with Linnea. And I actually now, I know this probably sounds awful, but sometimes I prefer my company to the company of others, right? So you really can get there. I would like to offer some suggestions for people that are like, okay, I'm there, I'm happy with me, but when loneliness creeps in, what can I do?
Yeah.
You know what? If you're at a campground, and we do this with safety, right? Listen to your intuition, know your surroundings, but engage locally. You know, I know that campgrounds have activities, right? So explore and engage, attend RV rallies or regional gatherings. I know you do that, Patrick.
Yes, I do.
Stay connected. Set up regular either phone or video calls with friends and family. And something I hadn't thought about until I started doing the research for this talk is restart or start hobbies. This is an opportunity, right? Especially when it's raining outside, you can't go outside, maybe restart a hobby. I love jigsaw puzzles, but I never have time for them. Journal about your experience, and also join online communities like this one, like yours, right? And then there's another one called Full-Time RVing, The Emotional Journey on Facebook. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but I
I'm
went in
not.
there. Yeah. And then finally, and I'm not telling people to run out and get a pet to travel with, but there is a recommendation to travel with pets, and about 70% of RVers apparently do, which I was unaware of that statistic. As you all know, animals provide emotional support and a sense of routine.
Absolutely. Such great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Well, you're
You
welcome.
know, the interesting thing is, I kind of want to pivot a little bit and talk to the digital nomad audience that I
Mhm.
have here, and that's folks that are still working, that are not retired, and that are on the road. What mental health considerations do we need to be concerned about for those digital nomads? What should they look for?
Your question about digital nomads is so timely because it not only affects your community of RVers and people living in vans. There's, as you're well aware, a whole community of digital nomads in fixed facilities, right? So the biggest concerns, again, for digital nomads, they reflect some of what people living in RVs and in vans experience, is again, the guilt for not feeling grateful or happy despite the beautiful lifestyle. Instability from a lack of routine. So, there's all this freedom. And I always tell my clients, freedom sounds wonderful, right? Until you have it. And then you're like, what do I do with it? Freedom of choice. Have you ever had freedom of choice where you're like, won't somebody just tell me what to do? I mean, freedom sounds great, but it can bring instability into your life. So of course, then you want to bring structure back in. For digital nomads, connectivity stress is huge. If
Yes.
if your safety depends on connectivity, and I know, Patrick, you finally got a satellite system,
With
right?
Starlink. Yeah, I got
Yeah.
Starlink. Mhm. That was
But
a big stress for me, Linnea. Yeah, thank you for recalling that. Interestingly enough, the connection with the internet issue, I have apps on my phone, and literally as I'm traveling, if the cellular connection isn't at a location that I'm planning to be at, I literally will pick up and leave because I
Mhm.
have to be connected for my work. So great point.
Mhm. Then the final one, which took me by surprise. I wasn't familiar with the fact that digital nomads, and it makes sense to me when I think about it, experience a high rate of burnout because there are no boundaries. And it's similar to people that work from home, again, digital nomads that work at home in isolation. When does your workday begin and end? Unless you set up virtual boundaries, there are none. You're not going into an office. It's not 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. It could be 7 until midnight. And so, again, structure and boundaries for digital nomads is incredibly important. And I would say, I know this talk is about mental health, but particularly for digital nomads, that burnout, because what's going to happen is what happens when people get burned out? They throw up their hands, their work suffers, they call in sick because they need to. I'm not suggesting they shouldn't. They need a mental health day, right? But work productivity may suffer. So it's a real thing.
That is so important. And all this that you're talking about resonates so much with me because when I was on the road, I literally needed to set boundaries for my work hours and not necessarily for my mental health, but because I couldn't drive and work at the same time. And my goal was to get to Arizona. But I do see the relevance of setting those boundaries for good mental health and to prevent burnout. and really to have a good work-life balance and enjoy your opportunities to be abroad and looking and exploring and really learning more about the areas. So that's great. I've got one last question for you before we're going to end our conversation today, and this is an important one, and I left this one to the end. One of the things I've heard from RVers that I've been in touch with is that if your marriage or your partnership isn't strong before you get on the road, then you may be likely to have challenges when you're on the road because you're constantly with each other in a small 2 or 3 or 400 space vehicle that's traveling across the country. Linnea, how do you mitigate this? What happens? What kind of things can you do to, first of all, recognize it and then hopefully deal with it?
Well, that's a great question. And you're right. Living in anywhere from 2 to 400 feet 24/7 with your partner presents very unique challenges because you rely on that person for emotional support, household operations, and even daily survival, right? So some of the common pitfalls / symptoms of when do we need to be concerned about our relationship is when you start having eye rolling. You're listening to your partner and you see this kind of thing, or sarcasm, or name calling. Those are signs, unfortunately, of a word called contempt. And of course, none of us want contempt in our interpersonal relationships. So we want to see the signs and symptoms before they become critical. So name calling, sarcasm, eye rolling, being overly critical of each other. And then the kind of converse of that is being defensive, hearing or seeing the eye rolling, hearing the criticism, and now becoming defensive and maybe doing something we call in mental health projecting, or what makes probably better sense to your viewers is blame shifting. You might be guilty of it, but you're going to blame the other person for it first, right? And then the old stable, I'm just not going to talk to you. So withdrawing, shutting down, and silence. So if you're, as a couple, experiencing any of those things, then you need to do something we call the 3 R's. And I just want to say, and it goes probably without saying, you want to do these 3 R's if you're in a safe, secure, calm environment. Not driving down the road, right?
Right. Pulling off in a rest area.
Yeah. Parked at your site, everybody feels good. And then schedule some time to talk about what's happening, and use your I words. This is one thing everybody can do without going to a therapist. Remember, when it's something you're feeling, say, I feel, I experience, I need, I want. Please don't do the you and point, right? No
Right.
you and point and no shoulds. I'm going to say this, and Patrick, you can edit it out if you need to. But I always tell my clients, don't should on yourself. Stop shoulding on yourself, right?
I
And
love
so don't should on each other. Okay, so we've talked about scheduling time, honor that time, and have a conversation, and schedule time every day to say, how are we doing? How are we doing? Share meals, but recognize that people need alone time, right? And so also schedule alone time. Okay, I'm going to go do my shower, and then I'm going to go take a walk. And then, but always be safe, of course. Know when you're going to be back. Take a cell phone, excuse me, all those things to be safe, especially if you're in an area that you're not familiar with. And then do things together too, though. Okay, I need my alone time, but now let's have quality time together. And remember that you can love somebody deeply and still need space. Space is not a bad thing. I was married to my husband for 25 years. And somebody said, what do you attribute your marriage, long time of marriage to? And I said, long deployments, because everybody needs their space. They need to be individual. So, and then finally, if one of the things that I read about that I guess is very disturbing, and because I travel alone, I don't experience it, but if you don't like your partner's music or books on tape, get some noise canceling headphones and listen to your own, right? So that's just another hint. And then there is, it's called a book by Earnshaw called Relationships in Close Quarters. And I believe that you could supply the reference to viewers if anybody's interested, but also your viewers can just Google it. It's called Relationships in Close Quarters by Earnshaw, and you may find that helpful.
Wow, such excellent counsel on this. That's great. You know, it's funny because I've met so many partnered or married couples on the road, and a lot of the strategies that you've talked about are what they do. You know, they have a check-in period, which I love, you know, where they check in with each other. How are we doing? You know, are there issues? The one thing that I've learned from the folks that I've met on the road is that silence isn't always good. And it's the opportunity to check in can really help feel the pulse of what's happening in the relationship. And you know, and then also too that your focus on audio books or music or those types of things. I mean, I would imagine that may, you know, rate on another individual's nerves, especially if you're driving down the road and we're listening to an audiobook that you absolutely detest. So,
right.
Yeah, really good thing. So, Linnea, I'm so thankful that you came on the channel to help us learn more about mental health and ways to be aware and when to know that you need help versus when to know that you just need connection. And those are so important in terms of ensuring that you have good mental health and good mental health awareness. I know you operate a business, and let me just make sure I get the name correct. It is the Spirit Integrated Care and Consulting business. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Spirit Integrative Care and Consulting is my business. Thank you for mentioning that. And my area of expertise, if you will, is mostly around issues of trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. I also see clients for anxiety and depression and a variety of things. I do a variety of psychotherapies. And if that is something of interest to you, I also do medication management, but we start with lifestyle psychotherapy and then move to medication management. If you are interested and live in Arizona, Arizona is your home state, please contact me. I am licensed in a variety of other states, but right now that is the state that I see clients in. I do both telehealth and home visits. I currently don't have a brick and mortar office because most of my clients prefer me to come to them.
Well, Dr. Axman, thank you so much for spending time with me and my Paddy Wagon Travel YouTube viewers. I know that the information you've provided will really help my viewers to be more mentally health aware and to take better care of their mental health. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for watching the video. This will conclude my mental health series on the Paddy Wagon Travels channel. If you're new here, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe to the channel. If you're an original or a new subscriber, I am so happy that you're here and I hope you're seeing value in the new way the videos are being done. Until next time, thank you for being part of this adventure and this journey. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and I will see you all in the next video.